Hello and welcome to Bharata First. You're watching Big Picture. I'm frankrausanpereira. Since you're here, please like the video, subscribe, and share the content as well so that more people get to know about Bharata First. In this edition of Big Picture, we will analyze the term that the Prime Minister has coined, local for global. This after the $400 billion target of exports was achieved. We'll try and understand where our exports stand and what needs to be done going forward to take it up another notch. And to do that, joining me on the program to discuss this are Dr. Ajay Dua, former Secretary, Commerce and Industry Ministry, Government of India, and also with us Mr. Jayant Dasgupta, former Ambassador of India at the WTO. Thank you to both my guests for joining me on this edition of Big Picture. Mr. Dua, let me start the program with you first. Let's talk about our exports and this term that the Prime Minister has coined as local for global. It's something that has been a pet project. He's always been talking about Atmanirbhar Bharat and how India has to make for the world. But are these just words, or is there any meat to the statement? How are we doing really as far as the export side is concerned?
I think the term has a lot of meaning. It resonates with, first, the Prime Minister talked about vocal for global, and then local for, from vocal for global.
Vocal for local to local for global.
Yes. It rhymes well. Having said that, we have achieved a goal of $400 million. We must credit the government with that achievement, because our exports had actually stuck around 330 billion. The highest we've been able to achieve was in 2018-19, 2 years prior to pandemic. So it wasn't because of pandemic that we were getting hit, but it's taken us about 4 years to cross that Rubicon of 330 billion. And I'm happy that we have now 400 billion target, and we hope that we will continue to have much more ambitious targets in future. That was the background, but the caveats come now. Number one, a lot of increase which has taken place during the current year is because of global inflation. Our highest increase, Frank, in the sectors which have grown, first is base metals, second is petroleum products. Our traditional exports, gems and jewelry, is just 1.5%, and the rest are all much smaller. So if the commodity prices have risen around the world, it has added to the value of our exports. Where we need to be making a comparison post 31st, that's post tomorrow, is that what was the extent in volume increase in our exports in the current year? Because that's what we need to build on. And that's in our hands, not really the values if the prices go up. That's my number one point. Number two is success of exports. And Jayant will tell us the international experience, having been at the WTO, that our deficit, current account deficit, imports versus the exports. The success is we start producing for the world, local for global, is when our current account deficit decreases. This year, it's now going to be a record, almost $200 billion. So economy had just about started recovering when the third wave of COVID came, the Omicron one. So there has been a little slowdown in the economy. That's getting reflected in the GDP data, etc. the lowering of estimates for the current year, employment data showing an uptick. Had the normal recovery process continued, even in Q4, we would have probably seen the CAD much higher, the imports would have gone up even more. So to start with, opening the discussion, I would stop here that good achievement, but we now got to worry about volume increase and make sure that if we get a benefit of the overall inflation by our export prices increasing, we are a highly dependent country for certain commodities, particularly the hydrocarbons, and their import prices also increase, and so we don't really benefit much.
Absolutely.
If anything, we are worse off probably now than we were last year. I'm quoting UNCTAD, which has said globally, analyzing data up to February, saying that the world hasn't seen much of an increase in volume trade, the whole world as well. And it is the value, and the value is this. And many of these countries, including India, which has been named, it has benefited from the values going.
Absolutely. So Dasgupta, coming to you now, the supply side of things was a big concern, really, with supply chains being disrupted around the world as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Is that now a thing of the past? Is that behind us? And have countries now become more resilient as far as the supply side of things are concerned?
I don't think the supply side constraints have really disappeared. For instance, if you look at the worldwide semiconductor shortage, which has affected our auto exports, for instance, and the exports of other white goods, domestic sales also, then the larger picture, if you look at our mobile phones and electronics exports, mobile phones have done really very, very well. And the electronic exports, if you take 2013-14 as the base period, we were exporting about 6.6 billion. We have now crossed 12 billion. So we have doubled. And there is a very strong tailwind. But semiconductor chips are one very important component, which is in short supply globally. So that will take some time to overcome. And China is, of course, the major producer of the medium technology chips. But the high-end chips are coming from the US and other countries. So that is where I think investments are flowing, but it will take time before the products come into the market. So that is one part. The second part is that the container shortage is still there. So we have been grappling with it, but it is not as acute as it was, let's say, about 8 or 9 months ago. It has considerably, I think, eased up. So that is the second point. The third point is, as Dr. Dua has mentioned, in terms of volumes, the exports have not gone up very much. If you look at a breakup of our export basket, the maximum increase has taken place in petroleum products. And it needs to be mentioned that, of course, we started around $65, $70 for crude oil, and now it is ruling at 120 or more per barrel. So that is one of the largest, if not the largest component of our export basket. Gems and jewelry, again, the value addition is not very high, about 10 to 15% at the most. But that has also shown remarkable growth, close to 60%, I think 58% or something. The supply side constraints have hit our drugs and pharmaceuticals exports because we are dependent even now a lot on the APIs coming from China. And we have shown very little growth in comparison with other sectors in the export of drugs and pharmaceuticals. in which we depend on imports as key starting materials or APIs. So that is a problem. So in short, I think we are not out of the woods yet. It will take time, but the rest of the world is also, I think, very actively looking at ways of reducing its dependence on a single source of supply, mainly China, and to diversify the, uh, the base so that should China get hit or should the single supplier in any particular field get hit, the overall output does not get affected very much.
Absolutely. So coming back to you now, I'm going to go back to a statement made by the Minister of Commerce and Industry, your old ministry, of course, who retired as secretary there. He's come out and said that we would like to achieve a target of $1 trillion in exports by 2030. And he says that the UAE is going to be a big factor in achieving that. This has come especially after a time when we've signed the CEPA with the UAE. Is that achievable, and how big a role do you see the UAE playing?
Frank, 8 years down the line, from current 400 billion to go up to a trillion means an increase of 250%. So roughly, which in a annual growth rate would come to about 25% CAGR, in order to get it to 250. Is that possible? I would say yes, but it would require a whole lot of things. Are we working towards it, or are we leaving it to global trade increasing? Our share will increase, prices will increase, so that we get the benefit of those. Plus whole lot of things within the country, including export getting the thrust, or foreign trade getting the thrust which it gets in China. That if in China, even now, if a producer says this consignment is for exports, the guy who holds it back thinks twice, because he might be held responsible even from the regulatory framework or the transporters, etc. Because you can complain that this guy had, he's not played straight, and that's why it's hit there. We as yet don't give the importance to exports the way it happens in China. Particularly, I'm coming to it, and Jayant's opinions I'll value greatly on this. The state governments still don't think foreign trade is their concern. We have somehow the other, and which are our 4 biggest states for exports? Gujarat, Maharashtra, Karnataka, and I think Kerala. Marine products, etc. Maybe Kerala or Tamil Nadu, almost. So those are the 4. The state of Haryana is said to be now the 4th, with lots of exports, etc. I think for them, exports, building up foreign trade is incidental to their various other issues. So I would think, apart from logistics costs to be reduced, etc., which make our products non-competitive, we talk about 14% of the value of the GDP is involved with logistics, shipping, and the rest of it. We need to halve it, if not lower, to get it down to the world average. All that's important. But I would like to see, to get a 20+ rate of growth, the states being stoked to play a major role in that exercise. Frank, just now, Frank, the data was mentioned by Jayant. I'll just read it out very quickly. The highest, if you look at between 2019-20 and 21-22, and you look at the figures up to January, the base metals have grown the fastest, 24%. Petroleum products, 20.4. Plantation, coffee, tea, 14.6%, electronics 12.3%, chemicals 11%, leather 8.5%. These are our traditional products. Gems and jewelry over 3 years, 1.7% rate of growth, and others is 7.5%. But during the current year, picture changes. If you look at only 1 year figure compared to the previous, engineering goods recorded 28%. Petroleum products, very rightly, almost 28%, a little 0.2% less. Gems and jewelry did get 11%. You know, the value increase I'm talking about, and for 1 year, it just goes down that way. So slightly, the point, I'm not questioning data or any such thing, but that's all available. But the points made by him were extremely valid. The question is, let us try and look at our CAD, current account deficit, rather than exports per se. Value increases, we export petroleum, products, we export gems and jewelry, but the local content there is very low. The value comes from there, we refine it, we push it back. Gems and jewelry, the uncut diamonds come, we cut it, set it to design sometimes. Most of the time, the polished stones go back. So those kind of things we need to worry about. And that is where I just want to read out one bit. The rise in petroleum prices, etc. This has actually taken down the net export content in terms of share in GDP down from minus 2.3% in 2021 to minus 4.2% in 2021-22. That means we have value certainly went up, but our contribution, which was already minus, that's almost doubled.
Absolutely. So Dasgupta, since we are here, what are some of the concern areas do you think that need to be addressed in the immediate near future so that we try and reach some of these ambitious targets that we are at least talking about right now?
I think the factors that need to be looked into are very well known. One of them is logistics. In the ribbon development that China has seen in the past 30 or odd years along the coastal areas, from a factory to the port, it takes barely 6 to 8 hours for a truck load of goods to reach. And then the efficiency at the Chinese ports is also very high. So a container does not take much time to get loaded and then leave the port. So there we have a lot of ground to make. The second point is about the customs procedures at the port for both exports and for imports, because as we go up the curve in terms of becoming a part of the global value chain, we will also have to import a lot. So therein lies the rub, that we need to also, make very rapid strides in terms of our import procedures. Because if we take on an average, let's say, 3 days to clear air shipments and slightly longer for sea shipments, then I think we are not there in the same league at all. So these are some of the things, but then the cost of electricity, because as we move up the value chain, we will need a lot of electricity, and our electricity costs are quite high. It depends on the industry. The consumption of electricity as a share of the total output. And we have to look at this area as well. The final point I wanted to make is that, there has been a lot of pent-up demand. The commodity prices have gone up. So the value, in terms of value, we have crossed the $400 billion mark. But it is not going to remain the same. And there are people who have predicted that we may face a bit of a downturn next year in terms of reduced exports. But that, of course, only time will tell. The point that I wanted to make is that you have to innovate. You have to bring out new products which are more efficient, which are cheaper, and which would be liked by the global citizenry or industries. And that is where I think we are facing the biggest problem, because innovating at the shop floor level and making things in a slightly better manner or slightly cheaper manner is one thing, but coming out with a new product which will call for sustained efforts on the research and development front, unless you do that, you can't really go from, let's say, $400 billion to $1 trillion in 8 years. So that is where I think we will face the hump. Either we go the whole hog. We have already chosen 13 or 14 industries for the PLI scheme. Now, we also have to simultaneously put in a lot of money, and it will probably have to come from the government mostly, because the private sector may not be either willing or capable of putting in so much of money without really concrete expectations or assurances of returns. So research and development, innovation, that will be the key to whether we cross the hump and actually go up to $1 trillion or more in the 8 years or so that we have set for ourselves.
Absolutely. All right, gentlemen, it's time to get quick closing comments now with the best way forward and how do we brace for all of this. Starting first with you, Mr. Dua.
Next year, probably we might see an escalation, and that is because of the space made by Ukraine in certain export products, particularly agricultural products. So we might see our wheat exports, which we are cashing on, and Russia might help us to reduce our import bills, particularly on fuels, maybe diamonds, because we also import diamonds, and maybe a couple of rare earths like cobalt, which comes from there, which it has and has been exporting. But that depends, that's purely short term. On a long-term basis, medium-term basis, whether we're going to be increasing our share of trade with Russia is a decision which is to be a comprehensive one, not just an economic or a trade decision. So I think all the points made by Jayant extremely valid, and I would summarize them in one term: competitiveness of your products, which is the one which is going to be the determinant. That are you going to become a major player in international trade, in the export market, or are you going to be just creeping up? Mr. Goyal's goal of 1 trillion requires us to change a full approach and be extremely proactive, and not just the marginal delta improving every year from a couple of percent to one more or so. So in the long run, if you accept that as a goal, start making all the changes which Jayant mentioned, address those issues, only then you'll be able to become a leading a player who's recognized as an exporter, reliable exporter, diverse exporter in the market.
Absolutely. And I think that's what we need to work towards. Reliable is the key word there. We need to be a reliable exporter, and let's hope that happens sooner rather than later. Mr. Dasgupta, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
I think we have not really touched upon the other factor, which is extremely important. We need to have investments coming in, both from the domestic sector as well as from foreign sources. So we need to prepare the ground, make it attractive for people to invest. And that is something which we really now have to, put our minds to, and provide an enabling framework which will see a jump, an appreciable jump in investments. Because that is where we have, I think, faltered in the past few years, if I may put it that way. The other point I wanted to make is that as reliable suppliers, we need to iron out all the small problems that exporters face on a day-to-day basis. So the state governments, the central government, the bureaucracy, the politicians, everybody, I think, has to take it up as a national effort. Only then will we have the exports sector getting the priority that it deserves, and then contribute to the national effort and the economy, and provide jobs, because it is a huge employment generating activity as well. So we need to take it up as a national effort.
Absolutely. All right, gentlemen, we'll have to leave to that. Thank you so much for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it for me. See you again next time.
Thank you.